Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Portland State University Friday Transportation Seminar. And I'm very pleased today to introduce Alex Bettinardi from the Oregon Department of Transportation. And he's going to talk about the unit where he works, TPAU, and we'll learn more about that and how the work in transportation analysis can inform transportation planning and policy. So Alex got his bachelor's and master's from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and he's been with ODOT for about 9 years. And I think you're from the Chicago area, so you can ask him questions about what it's like to move from the Midwest to Oregon. But Alex, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Right, and this is business casual on a Friday and from Chicago, so right. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, Professor Bertini and the class, the PSU students. I'm going to talk today about transportation analysis informing planning and policy decisions. And I apologize for that title not being as flashy as it probably could. It's hard to make words like informing and policy, into exciting titles. But I'm confident that this is going to be, very applicable to everyone here in the room. And I think it's exciting stuff, and I'm pretty sure I can convey that all to you, that this is an exciting topic. So a brief overview of the presentation. The main piece that I'm going to be talking about today is this third bullet, the analysis tools that are used at ODOT. But before I get into that third piece, I'm going to give you kind of a high-level overview of ODOT and a high-level overview of the unit I work in, which is the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit, TPAU. And I think I would have liked to include a slide after this saying, why should you care? And so I think there's two main reasons why you should care about this. One, because if you're in the transportation, I think most of you are all interested in transportation and a career in transportation. And so, with the small exception of, if you work for a private developer that, building parking lots or something like that, all of your projects will involve some kind of public funding. And so it's kind of important to know how that funding trickles through the system. And then the second piece, if you're going to do any work related to having information about what's not occurring today, and most projects need to know something about, what happens if I put a new development here and it reroutes traffic, or how does traffic look in 10 years? It's all stuff you can't go out and measure today. So that's going to involve some kind of tool or process, and so that's what I'm going to talk about in the third bullet. So I think this is all very relevant to you, and that's why you should care. So overview of ODOT, a little fun fact for anyone that's really observant. You noticed the header on the presentation. We have this, ODOT put together this nice, these nice master slides. ODOT's 100 this year. ODOT formally was developed in 1913. And I guess another fun fact, in 1905, it cost, the state picked up $3 from everyone in order to get Oregon out of the mud. And today, about 110 years later, if you drive about 12,000 miles, you put about $200 into the system. So, 110 years of inflation, we went from $3 to $200. This slide and the next slide kind of get at, there's kind of a funding issue. So this is a slide where I've asserted that that we have a multi-trillion-dollar transportation system, and that's not based on any specific number. As far as I'm aware, there's no one that's actually valued the transportation system for like a rebuild kind of cost. But if you were going to value your house, you wouldn't value your house on what it cost to build the house when it was first built in 1960 or whatever. You would value the house on what it's worth today, and that's based on what it costs to build new houses today. And when, so again, I don't have hard numbers for exactly how many trillions of dollars are in the system, but if you consider that we've got thousands of bridges in Oregon and tens of thousands of miles of highway and, hundreds of thousands of miles of roadway, and given that a couple of bridges, a bridge on the coast or a bridge across the river in Portland can cost $1 billion+, I'm pretty sure that that it's indeed a multi-trillion-dollar system that we drive on and rely on, and that we're in charge of keeping running. So how do we do that? So ODOT has mission and values and goals that go along with that mission. ODOT's mission is to provide a safe, efficient transportation system that supplies economic opportunity and livable communities for Oregonians. And like I said, there's a series of comprehensive values and goals that go behind making sure that that happens. ODOT has approximately 4,500 employees. It's kind of been decreasing. It was closer to 4,700 a couple of years ago. Now it's 45 or so. And they're broken up into 10 divisions. Those 10 divisions kind of piece out like this, where a lot of people, like when I've told people in the past that 4,500 people work for ODOT, when I first started saying it, I'd got kind of like get looks like that seems high, and before I kind of looked at the numbers, I'm like, yeah, I guess that does kind of seem high. But it's easy to forget that DMV is a part of ODOT, so that's 800 employees. There's about 60 to 70 offices, so it's about 10 employees in office, and plus there's a lot of non-office personnel that handles a lot of the DMV stuff. So DMV makes about 800 employees at ODOT. There's central services admin that handles stuff like training and IS support to make sure that we're running payroll. So that's about that's 12%. And then the biggest chunk of the pie is the highway group, and so that's the group that would do kind of the core function of ODOT, which would be making sure that our roads are maintained and handling the construction and maintenance. And so how does that 60% break out? There's 5 regions in the state of Oregon. And so each region is responsible for maintaining and doing the construction within their geographic boundary. And then, a lot of that staff is maintenance, and these are the maintenance districts within Oregon. So there's 13 of them. Six was absorbed, so there's 14 on here, but there's 13 districts. So funding-wise, we have ODOT has about $2 billion plus a year. This is a biennium, so you see there's $5 billion at the bottom of that. We came in with $500 million, so there's this is the current biennium. So there's $4.5 billion plus to that $500 million, so $5 billion. So about $2+ billion a year. That's the money that moves through ODOT. About 40% of that is distributed. That's not all just ODOT money. That's distributed to counties and cities. A lot of people, when they wake up, they don't think about, I left my apartment or my house, and now I'm driving on a city jurisdiction road, and now I'm going to go out to the pumpkin patch, and now I'm driving on a county jurisdiction road, and now I'm going to drive down to or up to Seattle, and now I'm driving on a highway jurisdiction. They're just driving on roads, but all these jurisdictions have their own systems and their own roadways that they're responsible for, and so the money kind of, a lot of the money filters through ODOT through the gas pump, so that the tax comes to the gas pump. ODOT handles it and filters it down through the other jurisdictions. So there's about $500 million to $1 billion in any given year of other funds that come in to the through other non-through ODOT to the local and the county and the city jurisdictions, as well as the transit authorities. So kind of round numbers, $1 billion to $1.5 billion of money or funds for ODOT in a given year, and $1 billion to $1.5 billion for local agencies. And so what do we do with that? ODOT's got to keep 19,000 lane miles and a couple thousand bridges up and running and new ones constructed, and we've got to make sure that 3 million drivers are licensed properly out there. Okay, so that was a really fast, high-level view of ODOT. Now I want to, just reminding you of the overview. I want to just give a little high-level context of where my group fits into the structure. So here's an org chart. As students, you might not be familiar with org charts yet. I know I probably wasn't as a student. I knew a little bit about kind of what my future would be. After I, was going to be in the professional world, but I was more worried about, midterms and finals and homework and stuff like that than this stuff. So here's your future org charts, and we fall. If you caught on the pie chart, there were 3% of ODOT that fell in the Transportation Development Division, and so that's where TPAU falls underneath that 3%, about 150 people. And so transportation development has 4 main sections underneath it. Planning, which is where I fall. Multimodal, which is kind of a mixed bag. It's not what you would think with multimodal. It's kind of miscellaneous, but multimodal is a section underneath transportation development. Data, which is the biggest section you can see there, and then research. And so like data, so that's the group in charge of collecting, for the most part, all of the data for the agency, stuff like road inventory, counts, crash data, and then GIS mapping and visualization tools for that data. And so underneath the planning section, where I fall, there's transportation analysis unit. There's about 17 of us. There's also a planning unit and long-range planning, and then freight and admin staff. So our unit, here's the org chart for the 17 of us, and it's hard to capture everything. There's a series of slides here that try and capture better what we do. This org chart doesn't really capture what we do. The main aspect of this is just showing that there's a kind of an analysis side that's more on the project side, and then there's a modeling side that's about building the models to predict how traffic interacts with land use and things like that. And it's a little heavier on the modeling side than it is on the project side. And so I didn't want to get into the detail of kind of this list, and this list is a little bit outdated of exactly the summarization of what we do. One thing I wanted to highlight in this slide is that where TPAU is really a unique unit for the country as far as we've seen to this point, where we've got one unit where we kind of take it all the way from model development down to the projects that are using those models. So it gives us a unique opportunity to interact directly, across cubes from the people that are developing the tools versus the people that are using them. And it also creates a need for us to find efficiencies, to have tools that interact and trade information better. And a lot of times you'll have really large MPOs that have really large modeling groups, and they'll have a group that's focused on the modeling world, and they're worried kind of about their internal needs and not so much about how people might be using it. And hopefully I'm not undercutting anyone, but it's unique in our group where we have kind of a direct business case to make sure that everything interacts as well as possible. So, nope, sorry, thought there was an animation there. So again, there's just a series of slides that kind of try and get at what we do at a high level. And the main thing is we have a lot of information that we can provide, and it's important that, let's see, we can answer a lot of different questions. And so we put this slide in here because sometimes we have customers that think they know, that have a small aspect or have gotten products from us in the past, and so they think that's kind of what we focus on, like VC ratios or something. And so they'll come asking us for volume to capacity numbers when their question might be totally different. And so we put this slide here for some of our customers who just to remind them that if they kind of involve us in the questions, there could very well be information that we can provide them that better addresses their question than what they're actually asking. So for the web audience, here's the poster that I placed up on the wall, and I don't want to talk about all the words on the poster. I kind of wanted to just have this poster be a symbol. We worked out a better analogy than the billiard balls that the web audience is seeing. So we've got these bricks, and so data. This is another message that we found is really important to try and work with our customers, because in the past we've called what we produce as data. We'll provide you data, and it gets really confusing because a lot of people have different ideas of what data is, and so we've been trying to stay consistent to this, and that we're not providing data, we're providing information. And so data is this pile of bricks, right? It could be it could be a bunch of timestamps in Portal for speeds that occurred on a given section of roadway, and so that table of data is, if you just look at that table of data as it kicks out from the recorder, it's fairly non-helpful. But if you use processes to form that that data into a heat map and provide some information, now you can create knowledge about what the conditions are out there on the highway. The same thing could be said for roadway inventory. Like if you were to roadway inventory, you're a neighborhood and you have your lane widths and you have if bike lanes are present and sidewalks. Well, just having a list of that information in a table, is obviously you need that. It's data, but it doesn't tell you anything until you process the information and create a map of connectivity issues where I've got good bike connections here, but I'm missing a point here, and so now you provided information so you can have knowledge about how to improve your bike connectivity. So that's kind of the purpose here. We've been trying to message this more and more. So I wanted to have this slide up or this poster up just to kind of remind you through the talk that we're in the information business. So that was a quick breeze through about TPAU, just really generic. Basically we provide information, right? That's the punchline. So now I want to get into kind of the real purpose of the presentation, to talk about the tools that we have to provide that information. And I kind of have a series of slides here that all say basically the same thing, and you guys might already know this, so hopefully I don't beat this to death. But so this is the first slide of a series. You'll get the pattern here. So what this slide gets at is there isn't one model to answer all the questions. Models have different geographic scales, and those scales and levels of precision at different scales, and so those that's important to answer different kinds of questions. Like down here, when you have a micro analysis, you're modeling how cars interact with one another. You're not going to use that type of model to try and get at how gas prices might change how many trucks flow on on a given corridor or something to that degree. At a statewide kind of level, how a gas price might or an urban growth boundary, how an urban growth boundary might change the dynamics of a given area. You're not going to use a micro-analysis tool for that. So you're going to use a higher-level planning and policy tool to get at questions like that. And there aren't really tools that answer all the questions. And if there are, they usually don't answer them very well. I really like this graphic. When I saw this graphic, I thought this was a perfect analogy, because whoever uses like a pocket knife, like the screwdriver of a pocket knife, I mean, that you would never do that in reality. I mean, you would go get a screwdriver, and if you are ever stuck in the woods trying to use like a saw, off of a pocket, I mean, that would be, personal hell. That would just be horrible. So, and kind of related to this is this quote that, if all you sell are hammers, then everything looks like a nail, even if it's not. So you have your model, it's this hammer, and you pound the screw into the wood, because that's all you have to work with. So, again, kind of a series of slides to say the same thing. It's a myth that there's one tool out there that, some people, there's misconception. So again, I don't think anyone in the room probably has this misconception. But we fight a lot with the misconception that there's kind of just one tool that will give people the answer. There's a toolbox of tools. And kind of another movie analogy, I'm not sure if the room is familiar with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's this very smart group of people that go out and build a computer program to answer the question of the universe, and the answer kicks back, it's 42. And the name of that model is Deep Thought, which is the Think Deep. And so the answer kicks back to 42, and they do some analysis for a couple million years, I think, and they eventually come back and say, well, 42 was right, we just didn't know what the question was. And so they build another model, more complicated model, to figure out what the question was, and that was Deep Thought 2, or in the planet Earth. So, and I like that analogy, because a lot of people that try and build a model to do them all really seem to try and be reproducing reality, when if they want to look at reality, they should just go to this nice Deep Thought 2 model that we're living on. So, kind of with that transition, I'll get into the tools. And so we put this graphic in just to kind of keep people or create a visual for what you're looking at. So we're going to zoom in from the statewide down to the street level. And so at the statewide level, when you have a statewide model, you can't see this building, you can't see the streets that are around here. You're not looking at ramps or streets. You're looking at how flows happen between cities, how major corridors are reacting to policies. So that's kind of that's the statewide models that we have. And so there's two of them I'm going to talk about. Time check. I think I'm okay. So we have the statewide integrated model, which we call SWIM. And so it's a really pretty unique model for the state of Oregon. And it integrates the economy, land use, and transportation. And most models are kind of, one way to describe most models would be like a snapshot tool where you've locked in a bunch of assumptions. Like if you're looking at the future, you've locked in a bunch of assumptions about what land use is going to look like, what gas prices are going to be, and you're modeling just that one case. And so what SWIM allows us to do is, since they're all interconnected, you don't predict, or you don't assert or specify a future. You start in the current year. You feed it the economic conditions. You assert the economic conditions that are going to occur, and then you give it the zoning information that exists or that will exist. And then based on the economic conditions that you assert, it grows land, it grows buildings and land use and houses, and figures out where people are going to grow or work and live. And then given that land use that it grows, it figures out how people travel between those different things that they want to travel to. And sorry, I just lost my thought there for a second. The sorry. So it integrates those three: economy, land use, and transportation. And after it grows, the land use and transportation. So it allows you to answer questions like like one of the biggest studies that SWIM was used for is, this group probably isn't that aware of OTIA, but for the past 10 years or so, OTIA has been funding a lot of, or a good portion of what the construction that ODOT's been doing. And so OTIA stands for the Oregon Transportation Improvement Act. And at the time, we saw that a lot of bridges were coming up in their lifetime, and they still are all over the country and in Oregon. And so we didn't have enough money to fix all those bridges, and so we were going to have to start weight restricting bridges because they were going to just fail, right, if you kept putting heavy trucks on them. So we thought that would be damaging the economy, but there was no real, how do you answer that question? Your traditional travel demand model can't answer the question of if this bridge closes, how is the economy impacted? But SWIM can. And so we were able to close a bunch of bridges to a certain class of truck, and then figure out, and then report some information back to legislators and different decision makers about the economic impacts to weight restricting bridges. And it was a very powerful tool, and we kind of did it again recently with some seismic scenarios. Oregon sits on a seismic plate. Not a lot of people think about it because it doesn't slip very often. When it does, it's going to be a big slip, and so there's going to be a lot of bridges that fail when it does, and so we could spend some money to retrofit those bridges so they don't. But again, like, what's the economic impact if those bridges were to fail? It's a hard question to answer, but SWIM allows some ability to answer that question, where no other model really does. So that's a unique kind of high-level question that SWIM can use. We've also used it for some smaller questions. Like just recently, there was a work zone on a section of I-5 near Cottage Grove, where because of the geography, there was no detour reasonable detour that could be made around the closure. Detours were on the scale of several hundred miles outside of the state of Oregon. So we use SWIM, beyond just a simple Google route search. We use SWIM because it had freight information about how trucks, where trucks were commuting to. So we could get an idea if we skim trucks in California off of I-5 and onto US 97, what kind of demand would there be? How many trucks have the potential to go or are going from California to like Portland, and so it would benefit them to skim off as opposed to waiting in congestion along I-5. Same thing with the coast. We were able to identify coast routes that, if trucks were heading farther north than they would typically cut over at I-5 if they just, headed north one more coast route. So we were able to use SWIM to get at not just routes, but the demand that could potentially use those routes. So that's a lot about SWIM. At the statewide level, we also have a model called HERS, the Statewide Economic Requirement System. It's a federal model, and it's a federal tool. And so it basically takes a lot of roadway inventory data from the hopefully you guys are used to acronyms, or if you're not, you better get used to them fast. But it's from HPMS, the Highway Performance Management System, and the feds use that to kind of allocate funding across the states, depending on what the need is, depending on how many roads every state has to take care of, and the use of those roads. So the Highway Performance Monitoring System, HPMS data set, feeds into HERS, and so the feds get these HPMS data sets from all the states, and they can run this, this nice kind of prioritization process on the HPMS data sets, so they can kind of identify, or it's a tool that can be used to identify, where poor, to quickly highlight where poor alignments exist in conjunction with high volumes. So it just helps you identify, quickly highlight areas that are the highest need for enhancement. And so the HERS model was recently used this past year with some freight bottleneck work. It was used in the state freight plan. And then consequently, after the freight plan was the bottleneck work, and so HERS was used to perform or to provide freight metrics for the highest priority freight corridors. And it was also used in the bridge option study, which fed the OTIA project that I was mentioning earlier with SWIM. SWIM was kind of the heavy lifter, but HERS also helped quickly illustrate under different funding scenarios in OTIA, which I forget if I said that, what that acronym stood for. It stands for the Oregon Transportation Improvement Act. I think I said that. So HERS helped classify under different funding scenarios, how much traffic would be using unsuitable roads, how much traffic would be hurting the environment, some quick kind of numbers like that. So HERS is a very powerful. It's a simple way to get very powerful information. So from the statewide, we fly in or fly down to the urban level. And so, an urban model, might be like the Salem, Oregon area. And so at this scale, you've lost the ability to kind of say, well, how does my area interact with Portland, as an example. But now you can say more detailed information about how a development on the east or west side of I-5 might impact corridors. So you're able to answer questions, more detailed questions about your area than you could at the statewide level, where you couldn't see any of this kind of nitty-gritty detail. And so our urban travel demand models are primarily used to provide average weekday travel on the roadways. It's hard to call out specific examples of these because basically any project of any size within a model area would use the model because it's just the best tool available to provide information on, like in these examples, air quality. If you had a transportation system plan, it's the best suited to provide volumes for your transportation system plan. If you want to assess new alignments or infrastructure, it's just the best tool available. So it's hard to pick out a specific example. But basically, any sizable project in an area with a model would use the model. And beyond just roadways, most of our urban models have information on transit use and bike and walk. And so in the state of Oregon, there's 3 MPOs, the larger MPOs that have their own modeling staff that run these travel demand models, these urban travel demand models. And so those are Metro, the Salem area, and the Eugene-Springfield area. Outside of those, the MPOs are too small to keep their own staff. And so ODOT, TPAU specifically, supplies the staffing and modeling resources for those areas. So that's Bend in Oregon, that's Bend, Corvallis and Rogue Valley in the south. And recently added is Albany next to Corvallis and Grants Pass next to Rogue Valley. And in addition to the MPO models, we also have 12 models 12+ models that we have for the smaller areas, like the 20,000, 10,000 populations, just because you have to use other processes besides a model, but we've developed kind of a uniform set of modeling code to apply to to quickly apply to these different areas, and the model is just the quickest way to get these types of answers, as opposed to kind of for each project, putting together numbers and OD trips and everything, or OD patterns. The model is just the quickest way to get this type of information, so that's why we kind of have these models at the smaller geographies. So then moving in again from the urban level down to the project level. So now as you approach the project level, you've lost information about that development that happened on the south end of town. You're assuming that's locked in. Whatever happened down there has already happened. It's already influencing your area. You've lost. You no longer have the ability to tweak. The bypass that's 3 miles out, perhaps. But you do have a lot at this level. You have a lot greater detail about how your specific project is working. So again, just kind of a different problem set. So here you've locked in assumptions about what's impacting your area. You've already done that work, and now you're answering detailed questions about things like how many turn lanes are needed to get a certain level of service, the signal timing required to allow the best flow through the corridor, what kind of queue lengths can be expected, safety impacts, things like that. And I think that pretty much covers that slide. So those are that's not all the tools that we have, but those are the kind of the main tools that we use on a regular basis. I guess I should have mentioned on this slide that so these are micro simulation tools, to get at stuff like queue lengths, and then processes or methods like the highway capacity manual or highway capacity software to kind of get at things like level of service. That's the tools or methods used at this level of analysis. So again, those are the models that the models and tools that we are currently using. But hopefully most of you are interested in. I'm very interested in it. The future is very unknown. There's a lot of things on the horizon that have the potential to be changing the way that we do business. And so currently we're very interested in this uncertainty. So I'm just going to kind of not get into too many. I don't want to really nitpick these different aspects, but I just kind of want to highlight some of the uncertainties that we've identified. So one issue on the horizon are the baby boomers retiring, and it's a pretty well established trend that if as populations age, they retire and they drive a lot less than they do when they're working. And so as this group moves into retirement, it would therefore mean a lot less VMT. The millennials are still kind of a wild card. Who knows what you guys are going to do. But currently, it looks like they're going to drive a lot less, but it could be because of economic conditions driving that. But it's just an uncertainty that we are trying to account for or trying to get a better handle on. Some other kind of, just throwing some uncertainties out there that we're not really, that are not quite sure how they will impact us yet. Increases to urbanization in 2010 for the first, in the history of time, more people lived in urban cities than did in rural environments, and that is just a trend that's going to continue to increase unless there's some bigger change that impacts that. Changing income distribution. That's kind of political. I won't spend too much time on that. Vehicles starting to be viewed less as a service, or more as a service and less as something you own, like shared car to go. It seems to be, again, none of this stuff is, I'm not asserting I know the answers. This is all uncertainty, but it seems to be people are caring more about their health and environmental issues, and those could both impact how much people drive. If they want to be healthier, maybe they bike more, and that also saves the environment. It's pretty certain that connected vehicles will be utilized to improve safety in addition to mobility in the environment, but we can't say with 100% certainty, but it's becoming more and more a reality that these connected vehicles will be definitely a part of your system as you get ready to manage it. And then after connected vehicles, there's autonomous vehicles, and this is less certain than connected vehicles, but a number of car companies have already stated that they're going to have autonomous vehicles out on the market by 2020 or earlier, and that has the potential to drastically impact there's definitely a range at how much that could impact, from not very much to a totally different world. And so there's lots of different ways. I would say this is kind of in the middle of that range, but in the middle of that range, if you had autonomous cars, you might not need as many parking lots, because the car could drop you off and go serve somebody else, as opposed to sitting in the parking lot waiting for you. So it's lots of impacts, a lot of uncertainty. The fuels that we use tomorrow are uncertain. Oregon's one of the leaders in the EV infrastructure. So hopefully Oregon will have a lot more electric cars sooner than later. And technology allows for a lot more real-time information to be provided to users, allowing for people to make smarter choices about the modes that they use and how they get from one place to another. And it also allows for new technologies like the EV bike, which could basically flatten the terrain for someone that doesn't want to ride up a hill or doesn't want to carry a lot of weight in groceries or something. The EV bike has great potential. So this isn't comprehensive. This is just an initial start of some of the things that we're looking at. And so there's a lot of different directions that one person could go in or focus on. And from what I've seen, a lot of people are kind of focusing on kind of like one aspect. And what we're trying to do right now is start to build a framework for how these different things interact with one another, not to provide an answer for what the future looks like, but to start to prioritize the uncertainty and to say, if X were to happen, what is the range of impact that it might have on the measures that we care about and provide in the future? And so those potential changes that have the greatest chance to impact our measures and have the most likelihood of happening, we would want to put our research and development dollars towards that to make sure that we could provide information about how that impacts future plans. So that's what we're working on currently. And so so sometimes existing tools do not suit the analysis analytical needs, and so we kind of have so it might be that our tools are not best suited to answer some of those questions that I just had. And so we have and at TPAU we have a history of developing tools to kind of get at questions that our current tools are not well suited to answer. And so I just wanted to highlight kind of two of those examples. We have a tool called Luster, which is the land use scenario developer in R. And R is a package, a language package like Python that can be used to build models with. So we build some models in R. And so Luster is an interesting tool because it doesn't assume or model. You don't assume a land use and you don't model a land use. You kind of shotgun 50 different land uses at the future. And you use that uncertainty and basically you assess the uncertainty of the future. And so with information like this, you can say, if land use were to develop in this way, it would be beneficial to the transportation infrastructure. If it were to develop this way, it would be bad, and just being bad or good to the transportation infrastructure might not be enough reason to go one way or the other, but at least you have the information of, if we allow development to occur in this subdivision or on this side of the interstate, we would be paying a lot more for ramp construction, whereas if it happened on this side of the interstate, we might be able to get away with the infrastructure that we have currently. And so that gets at this concept of uncertainty is informative. And in this slide, it's just a concept. This isn't a specific project, but if you've got this area and you've identified two locations on corridor A and corridor B, you can draw these, and you've run 50 scenarios. These green dots are scenarios, right? So you can draw conclusions like, B is more likely to need widening than A because in more scenarios, B has higher volume than A. And you could also ask questions like, well, what are the characteristics of the land use that allows us to stay in the quadrant 1, because then we don't have to build, we don't have to increase A or B, and maybe if those land use, if those land use patterns and growth patterns look like good ideas, then you could, your area could pursue those. So that was Luster. We've also the TPAU. Brian Greger was responsible for both Luster and Green Step, and Brian Greger / TPAU, if TPAU gets any credit, developed the Green Step tool. And so Green Step was developed because legislators were looking at GHG issues. And our current models kind of assumed a bunch of things or required behavior trends to exist in order to model, so the behavior for e-bikes doesn't exist right now because there aren't a whole lot of e-bikes out on the market. So you can't have a model built on the behavior of, well, what happens if you do this policy? How many more people will ride e-bikes? So what Green Step does is it allows people to kind of envision many different futures, like, well, what if we could get 20% people on e-bikes? What if we increase parking costs to this? Not so much. And then it allows you to look at kind of, in a way, it's kind of a quick response tool because you're able to look at, in most of the work that was done, 150 scenarios or so. So a wide bank of scenarios as opposed to the one or two you could get through in a traditional travel demand model, and it allows you to kind of say, okay, well, in order to meet our GHG goals, we have to do X, Y, and Z, and pricing, land use, and technology are kind of the big ones that came out, and our like I was kind of getting at, our current tools just aren't equipped to get technology questions like e-bikes, and wish I could come off with a better one. Car sharing isn't really prevalent. It's hard to get good information on that. The range of electric, of EVs, our EVs only go about 100 miles right now. So, what if you could get EVs to go 300 miles? Would that cover most people's needs, kind of thing? So that's kind of how Green Step was used. So our work continues. We've got a number of things kind of in the hopper that we're trying to advance. What's my time like? Okay. So I won't spend a lot of time on each of these, but the travel cost index is a way to get at accessibility. So we're trying to get at accessibility better. Bike level of traffic stress gets at not so much is there a bike lane, but what is the comfort level of that bike lane. So we're trying to incorporate that into our accessibility measures. We're trying to get better at transit service and connectivity, answer better questions about land use. Performance measures out of MAP 21 with reliability, the speed data that's the real-time speed data that's available now is really making us approach things differently. New big data sources like cell phone and Bluetooth, and as well as the reliability data are making us develop new tools and processes. And then, like I was highlighting with that long list, we've got this future issues on the horizon, and we need to prioritize where to spend our money to get our tools set up. So that was my overview of the tools that we have and kind of what we're doing with those tools. So lastly, I just have a couple slides here on how, on just kind of like my tips to students who, again, are focused on maybe midterms and finals, and just in ways that if you want, you can stay connected professionally. So Oregon is really unique in that it has this group called the Oregon Modeling Steering Committee. It's a group of the feds, state agencies, and every MPO in Oregon. And it gets together and collaborates on modeling issues and shares a lot of resources. And I don't want to talk about the OMSC in detail, but one of the aspects of the OMSC is that underneath the OMSC we have the Oregon Modeling User Group. And so that's a great way. It meets up here in Portland quarterly. Yeah, it meets quarterly. Perfect. And it's a great way to kind of hear what's going on in the modeling community and stay connected. So if you're interested, I'm sure you can get on the mailing list. I would contact Kyle Hager from Metro. This is definitely not comprehensive, but there's lots of great spots out there to kind of start participating in professional communities and kind of hearing the conversation. And I've fought Facebook for my life, and I haven't Twittered yet, so I'm sure there's lots of Facebook and Twitter sites too, but I'll let you guys find those. And so I'm sure there's a lot more than this list. This is kind of the list that I participate in. So, yeah, that's it. I'll open it up to questions. Yeah. Oh, let's get the mic for you. One sec.
And please say your name before you ask your question.
Well, I'm Destiny. The question I have is, like technology is improving, and you mentioned about technology in your speech. So I want to know, as technology keeps improving, everything keeps advancing, what's going to happen to, your old model? How will you connect that to the new technology that is being used today?
Yeah, so it's definitely a question we don't 100% know the answer to. One of the things we're moving towards, so right now, like our travel demand models are trip-based, and I'm not sure how much, I'm trying to get into too much, but a trip-based model basically treats trips as aggregate zones of people, and so a zone of people will make trips to areas throughout the area, and that works very well for traffic volumes. But a lot of the industry, and including us, have started to move to activity-based models. And so in activity-based models, sorry, I am going to answer your question. This might feel like it's not. But activity-based models model discrete people and discrete choices. And it's just a better, it's a better framework for getting at questions like, well, what if that unique household had access to an e-bike? Right now we don't have any behavior information to say like when they would adopt an e-bike or how they might use it. But if we found out that e-bikes were really important and they could really change the equation, we could say, well, what if 10% of these households had e-bikes and they could ride, they had a range of 10 miles and grade didn't matter anymore. We could answer questions like that. So to kind of get at your question, or to my answer to the question is, we're moving off of trip-based and onto activity-based models, which will allow us to, instead of looking at a zone of people where it's really hard to say something intelligent about, well, let's say 10% of this zone of people use it, and we're going to spread that 10% across these types of demographics. It's hard to explain quickly why it's complicated, but it's complicated. It's a lot easier to just say this household with this, this family type would be interested in an e-bike, we think, and if they were to use it, we would get this result. So activity-based models will allow us, they might not be the complete savior to get at all those technology questions, but they'll allow us to answer a lot more questions than we currently can. So that's in the immediate future, that's one thing that we're trying to do. Our models could look, don't look at me started, talking about this, but our models could look totally different in 10 years than they do now. But yeah, so.
I have a web question, so I'd like to throw that in just because I like saying that question from the web. What are some of the core skills needed to pursue employment opportunities in modeling, and what are some common courses that would provide those skills? Yeah,
okay. Again, that's one I could really kind of go off on a tangent about. We'll see if I can keep it in line. So it's one thing for ODOT and it's one thing for the community. So in the community in general, I would say, for modeling, it'd be any kind of software exposure you can get yourself to. Python. Let's see, Java is big. So any kind of exposure to that would be good. ODOT specifically, without getting into the hierarchy too much, big agencies are kind of sometimes bogged down with red tape, and one of the red tape aspects is our group only hires engineers, so you would need an engineering background specifically to get into ours, but I wouldn't say that should limit you from the modeling field. Lots of modelers don't have engineering backgrounds, and you don't necessarily, well, I like engineers, so I'll say you need one. We'll just stick with that. So software background.
One quick thing: we do offer a research methods course in our program that our students are required to take. Just
perfect. And so I'm not doing a great job of answering it, but the software component would be great. Any of the engineering foundations, even if you're not an engineer, but some of those engineering classes, just to make sure you have the traffic foundations down. That's important, especially if you want to model for transportation. And I think more and more ITS is going to be the solution as opposed to buying right-of-way and constructing new lanes. So any opportunities to get into kind of EE software classes or hardware classes, with devices. I'm not sure how many of those, but I think that's going to be something that is going to be very valuable in the future. That hand went up first, and okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, okay.
Kind of just a brief question. I know you do a lot of data modeling. So do you have a strong relationship with other organizations when you do planning and strategizing for the future? So for example, DEQ, do you do any, or ODFW, do you do any work with those organizations when you're doing modeling for how a certain project may affect the environment?
Yeah, so I can talk to that a little bit. There's 4,500 of us, and there's probably at ODOT, and there's probably one of those people that could talk a lot better about that question. So at least from the modeling side, you know, the Oregon Modeling Steering Committee, we do have DEQ at the table and DOE, as well as housing and health, and feels like there's at least one other I'm forgetting. But so to kind of get at your question, I forget which acronym it was, if it was DOE or DEQ, but we just worked out a deal where we'd be sharing the same DMV, the vehicle record information with MPGs attached to it. So now we'll be collaborating. We'll have the same data set of where the vehicles are and what their efficiency is. That doesn't really get into your question exactly, but to kind of broadly answer the question, I would say Oregon has a pretty strong collaboration record and does a pretty good job of communicating with all stakeholders.
Brian Blanc, and I just wanted to ask, you showed a bar graph about the possible changes in freight patterns because of structural deficiencies in bridges. I just wanted to ask what you think some of the implications might be of that in the future.
So we hopefully we fixed that one, right? That's a solved. That was back in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002. Where we identified all that, and we were able to get the funding to fix most of the bridges, so that there are no bridges. Well, there are bridges, but no additional bridges were weight restricted. We were able to get the funding to keep them open, at least for now. So, does that answer your question? Like, solve for now? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
My name is Jie Kang, and my question can relate to previous questions about the relationship with other organizations. So I have a question about demographic information that you use to forecast the travel demand. So what are the primary sources of gathering demographic information? Like, do you directly gather the data by like a questionnaire, or do you use like a second-hand data?
Okay. So demographic data, so if we're just going to figure out where people live, we use census. I might be forgetting a source, but for the most part we use census to figure out where people are and their demographics. But then to figure out what kind of people make certain decisions, we conduct travel household or household activity surveys. And so we have all the demographics about those. It's about 1% of the population when we do it, and the feds do it too under the National Household Travel Survey. So we ask about 1% of the population to tell us demographic information about them, and then how they traveled for a day. And unfortunately, for most of this country, it's just a day, and we're trying to get better at finding out questions about full VMT or full vehicle use across how people actually use vehicles, not just on their typical commute day, but how they recreate with their vehicles and things like that. Because if you have a 10-mile commute, you might be able to use an EV, but if you want to drive to the beach on the weekend, maybe that EV isn't going to suit you, and so you're never going to buy one. So we'd like to know more information about how people travel. Our vision is widening beyond just the kind of the commute period, like fixing that congested period at the commute. So we're trying to get a bigger picture. But so currently we have census, and then we figure out behavior through surveys. Yeah. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Hi, I'm Amy.
Hi.
So in your introduction, you said that you have lots of different tools in your toolbox to answer the questions, and sometimes your customers don't know that you have all those tools. Who are your customers?
So customers, we've got a lot of them. But so depending on the model, so like a consultant working for a developer might be a customer. They might, a big box store might want to go in And in order to do that, they've got to assess the impacts that they're going to put on the system. So they would hire a consultant to figure out what the impacts are, and that consultant would come to us to figure out what, using the travel demand model, how traffic would travel to and from their area, so they can write a report on how the development would impact the area. Cities and counties use the tools to develop their transportation system plans. So they look into the future and they put projects together to try and answer or trying to address problems that they see popping up. So they approach us, and kind of along with that is ODOT region staff who assists the local agencies to some degree in that process. It's kind of the statewide level. It's more policy. It's more like kind of the director level of different agencies and the legislators to get at questions about funding, funding programs. So that's a really quick list, but that's some of the big ones. Sorry, I'm where the microphone goes.
John Landoff. So you described earlier how travel behavior is changing both among older people and younger people, and implied that's going to change the projections as we go forward. So I'm just wondering how fast those projections are changing. If I'm looking at a study from 4 years ago, can I trust that data, or has the model changed that much?
Well, I would say our projections are, the best you can currently get. I mean, without the projections that stand, it's just guessing. So you can guess however you want. We do need to account for it better, but our models do have demographics in them. So we are at least accounting for if the population ages, and if we're aging the population in the way that it will age. I mean, things could happen, like different groups of people could move in and stuff like that. But under that assumption of the population ages like this, we do know a lot about how driving characteristics change as people age. So we are accounting for some of the issues, just not all of them. And I would say that just because the model isn't perfectly capturing, isn't a perfect crystal ball, it's still better than just kind of wild, assertions about what might happen. Like I might do about I love to make assertions about autonomous vehicles. They will change. Anyway. So I got to stop myself from making wild assertions about how autonomous vehicles will change. But so yeah, does that kind of cover it? I don't know.
Wayne Corrick. So you model current conditions and then model when say out post-development. Do you guys also have modeling for during the process of the development, say like the CRC or the Selwood Bridge?
Sure, kind of like staging.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It could definitely be done. I'm not sure about CRC. If I would think with staging they might want to figure out. I would think they would have done. I'm not 100% certain about that. But yeah, there have been cases where we'll do kind of several instances to kind of show, not just a beginning and an end, but intermediate steps. So it's definitely possible. It's just kind of like, what the important questions are the models the right ones to answer those questions, and then the funding that's available. How much time and funding is available. So it's possible, though, definitely.
Hi, Andy Kading. I was wondering where your models originate from. Do you develop them in-house? Do you have them built for you by outside firms? Did they come from the U.S. government?
Sure. So for us specifically, the models we currently use, they're all different. But so the statewide model was a fairly large consulting team that developed the statewide model. The urban models that we use, the code was all written in-house. It's in R, but the kind of the creation of it, the equations of it, were actually developed up in Metro, so in Portland Metro. So their MPO staff developed the equations, and we just implemented those equations in R for the areas that we handle. And then like the green step and the luster models, those were developed in-house, again, in R. As we move to activity-based models, we're looking to use consulting staff to, consultants have already implemented ABMs across the country in a number of locations, and so we're looking to build off of their, the efforts that they've already put in. So it's kind of mixed. Yeah.
I'm Rachel Hanna. So on one of the other questions, you were talking about how you got the data. And so I was wondering, you said you kind of wanted to look at the bigger picture more. So what are you doing that's different to look at the bigger picture instead of just day to day?
Yeah, well, that's one we don't have a lot of great answers for, I would say, yet. I think big data plays a role. I think more and more we need to get used to looking at just streams of data and how you process that, and and build relationships off of maybe not knowing how specific people are moving, but how waves of individuals are moving. So I don't have it all kind of pieced together exactly how big data plays out, but I think we need to be serious about looking at big data, and so that's kind of where like software database programming comes in. I think it's really important for engineers, specifically modelers, to get into, because you can't do this stuff in Excel. I mean, you got to be a programmer to deal with big data. So I think it's really important that the program brings that in, and then we've got some research concepts on ways to kind of tease out more information about how people are traveling, but it's still a work in progress. Is the answer.
Thank you all very much. And before we thank our speaker, just remind you that next Friday at noon we have John MacArthur from OTREC. Interestingly, he'll be talking about an e-bike research project that he's been working on.
Cool.
And I've been passed in the Netherlands by many e-bike riders, and it's very frustrating. So it's a very flat country, though. So we look forward to his talk, and let's thank Alex for his great presentation.